those of you that haven't found them yet, we have handouts, and the handouts are available over there. And there's going to be a full-blown PowerPoint display, and it's contained in the handouts. My name is Bill Marianis, and I cannot tell you how excited we are for all of y'all to be here. This has been something that Elaine and others have been putting together for a long time, and to bring it together and to bring you all here is just really an exciting opportunity. And we're going to do some things that may be a little bit different from what you're used to. We're going to do some things that may seem a little manipulative, but we'll tell you all the way along the way of the journey here exactly what's going to happen. And it kind of begins with the statement that's at the bottom of the first kind of begins with the statement that's at the bottom of the first screen. If you're going to live, leave a legacy. And for those of you that are young, and I see some beautiful young faces over here, thank you for coming. You're probably not quite thinking about that, but for those of us whose runway is a lot shorter than it was when we were your age, we do start to think about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this down into 4 segments that kind of build on each other after I present some kind of foundational data. And then those segments are going to bring together the theological side of what we're doing. They're going to bring together the Archdiocese commitment to what we're doing and the great commitment that's going to be forthcoming. We're going to take you on a quick journey through the legal side, so I don't want anybody's heads exploding. We have duct tape available in the back of the room when my brother Bill gets up here and starts talking about the legal stuff. And at the end, we're going to actually give you a step-by-step process of how you can actually implement a plan giving campaign and an endowment in your parish as the first step on the journey. Now, there's an old saying that's been attributed to a lot of people, but I did the lineage on this. I shaped it all the way back, and it is actually a Greek proverb. Of course it is, right? And what it says that, I did a little bit of editing over there, but it really talks about how the society that actually is great, a truly great society, is one when the old men and the old women actually plant trees in whose shade they will never sit. And that is really the essence of what we're talking about here. Through the legacy of what you're going to be giving and the generosity that you're going to be giving, you will be planting the seeds and foundation of trees that are truly going to be an extraordinary opportunity that you may not ultimately get the benefit of, but that will actually ensure the longevity and protection of your parish in continuity. It was Winston Churchill who said that we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And this is an opportunity to think about your journey on your journey of theosis, to see the kinds of giving and generosity that you can do. Now, there is a great call to action, and anybody that's listened to me talk before knows that I already focus on this a lot. It's in 2 Corinthians 5:10. It's actually buried in the middle of the Divine Liturgy, but it is the greatest call to action, and it's something that I ask every one of you to begin to think about as you start to think about the legacies that you're going to be creating here. It's kind of a selfish prayer. We start to pray about what the end of our lives would look like, and none of us want it to be painful, and we always want it to be kind of a blameless and peaceful end. But it's the statement at the end that I want to focus your attention on. For a good account before the awesome judgment seat of Christ. And my brothers and sisters, that is the thing that distinguishes us as Orthodox Christians from those who are not Christians. We will live forever. That is a settled issue. Only question is, will you like where you are? And you have some opportunities in the way you do that. But here's what we're trying to get you to understand. That the journey that you're on is not just a journey of the 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, or maybe even 100 years of your life here on this earth. The journey that we are on is a journey that goes in perpetuity. And yet we have a unique opportunity through the plan-giving process and the endowment process to leave a legacy behind that truly will make a difference in our communities. Now, I always try to study for the exam, and so if I was trying to think about what would be the toughest question that our Lord and Savior could ask us when we were standing before the awesome judgment seat of Christ, the toughest question I could come up with is, this is him talking, not me. What did you do with my church under your watch, given all the gifts that I gave you? Given all the gifts, the talents, the resources, the people that I gave you, what did you do with my church? And it is the topic that we're going to talk about today that is really going to be one of those essential investments that we can make in the future of our churches, well beyond our lives on this earth as we enter the world eternal. Now, Those of you that know me know that I like to set the stage with some data. You know, a lot of people like that. When I first started doing this kind of stuff, on Jim and I and whatnot, we go around, and I discovered something very early on. Orthodox people know everything. Just ask them, and they'll tell you they know the answer. And when you ask them, where'd you get that information from? Well, they don't always have the answer. But we went and did some time and did some data. So as we start to think about planting the seeds for all of eternity, as we start to think about the legacy that you're going to live, I want to give you an idea of the order of magnitude of the opportunity that is available to you in your parishes right now. The data sources are always at the bottom of the screens. There are handouts available. This is available on multiple websites, so it will always be available for you. But here's the point, here's the number I want to plant in your head, and don't ever forget this number. If you don't remember anything else I say, I hope you remember this number. $30 trillion. $30 trillion. The estimate of the net worth, there will be $68 trillion of wealth that will be passed on in the wills and the estates of the people around. And we have a unique opportunity to make the case, and trust me, we have to make that case, that our churches deserve its more than fair share. So here's some other things that you might not know. 67% of people have no idea what is meant by the word planned giving. Now, in the promotion of this program, we talked about it being planned giving. Now, let's be honest, show of hands. This is audience participation. I want to make sure you're awake. Raise your hand if before you entered the room today you knew what planned giving really meant. Well, see there, you are a very educated group. You are better than the 67% of people that don't.
We're Orthodox.
So for the few people that didn't know that, or the few people that raised their hand and were joking when they raised their hands, it's really, really simple, folks. It's all about making a charitable gift either during your life or in your will and estate plan. Now, the people that do this for a living can make it a lot more complicated than that, but that's really all planned giving is. It's a plan to make a gift either during your lifetime or in your estate. Now, they've done surveys of people that have made major donations to nonprofits, colleges, universities, churches, museums, and institutions. And they asked them, what was it that caused you to make that gift to that organization? And they rated them from the number one to the number as far down the list as they could get, right? There was one thing that was number one on the list, and it was so far number one on the list that you couldn't see number two on the list. The number one reason why people chose to make a sizable gift to a to a college, a university, a hospital, a church, a religious institution, is simply because they were asked. I've talked to people that have given tens of millions of dollars to institutions, and I said, why did you give it to that institution and not to your church? And they said, because the institution asked me and the church never did. So I'm asking you right now to think about, when was the last time you asked anybody to put the name of your church in their wills and estate plans to make a sizable gift? We have to get beyond the fear of making that ask. Now, here's another data point that I want you to understand. I'm going to ask you for a show of hands here. Prior to COVID, the best estimate was that about 58 to 60% of Americans had no will. After, as the COVID started to hit, that number went up to 68%. You do not need to raise your hand if you don't want to. We are not selling anything here today, so no one's going to solicit you to sell your will. But let's be honest, how many of us have wills? See, once again, you are off the charts in a great, extraordinary group of people well beyond the norm. Now, I'm not going to ask you how many of you have a will that leaves your church in it. But that's the conversation that we're going to start today. And by the way, for those of you that don't have a will, I have bad news for you. You have a will. The problem is you didn't write it. The state wrote it for you. When you die without a will, the state determines what happens to what you have. And it isn't always the way you might think it was, right? I was in the state of Georgia, for example, instead of the estate going to the surviving spouse and then to the kids, it gets equally divided amongst the surviving spouse and the kids. And I was talking to somebody once and said, wait, you mean my 13-year-old kid's going to give a third of my estate? And I said, let's get that will written. So this is an opportunity to actually have a very positive conversation with our parishioners. Now, when we actually start to look at the data, and again, the sources are all down there, so you don't have to believe me, you can do the research yourself. Only 4.5% of Americans have actually made a charitable planned gift bequest. So while some of you have a will, I suspect some of you may not be in that small, less than 5% that have actually included the church in the will. Now, let me tell you the good news in here, because I'm always a good news kind of guy. If only 5% or less of your parishioners have actually put your church in the will, that means that over 95% are your potential target customers for what we're talking about today. Think about the great service you're going to be able to do to those people, the 95.5% of your parishioners who have yet to think of saying, fill in a blank with the name of your church and putting it in there. Now, when they did research, they said there's 4 reasons why people don't have wills. And it's real simple. The general rule of procrastination, and none of you here suffer from that, like given the fact that you all raise your hand if you have a will. Then a lot of people think they don't have enough assets. Some people think it's too expensive. And some people just even don't know how to do it. Here's the beautiful thing. What we're going to talk to you about today, what the Archdiocese is investing in helping you do over the next year, is to solve all 4 of these problems for your parishioners. To demonstrate to them that there is an opportunity that the church will help them do to solve this issue. They don't have to procrastinate. They don't need to wait. They have plenty enough assets to do it. I'll give you data in just a second to prove that. And that they're really not expensive and there's ways we can do it. So here's the way I'm going to prove it to you. When they do assessments of net worth, what they found is that 95% of people's net worth is in stocks and property. It's not in cash and marketable securities, with the exception of Yaya and Papu, who probably still bury it underneath their mattresses, right? I mean, we all know some of those folks, and some of y'all may be in that category. So when we're talking about the fact that 95% of their wealth is in stocks and bonds, it's not affecting their daily life to make a planned gift by giving that stock and bond. It's not affecting their income, it's not affecting their cash flow, it's not affecting their ability to pay bills in that regard. And so one of the things we want to make sure that you start to think about is that every one of your parishes have to make it easy to accept stock and other securities as gifts to the church. And let's face it, those of you that have been investing a long time, even with the market crash in recent days, you probably have some stock where you got very low basis and a very high gain. That's a perfect opportunity for you to give that stock, get a full tax deduction for the value of that stock, and the best news is you get to mess around with Uncle Sam. Are there any IRS people here today? You need to be very careful, Elaine. We don't want to get in trouble here. You don't have to pay the tax that would have otherwise been due. When people make a plan, on average, 200 times the size of their largest annual fund gift. Think about this differently. If you look at their annual stewardship contribution, the typical plan gift is 200 times larger than that. Are you starting to see the opportunity? Are you starting to see the resources that we have available to us? And what's interesting is that people who make plan gifts in their wills typically will also increase their stewardship and their other generosity because they see the value in what they're trying to do with their parish. So we're really actually giving you an opportunity to give them an opportunity to be better stewards in everything they do. Here's the other number I want you to remember. The typical charitable bequest, on average, is $78,630. $78,630 is the typical charitable bequest. But what they find out is that most people have 2 of those in their wills, okay? So I wanted to do the math real easy for you. If you will multiply the number of parishioners that you have by $78,630, this is how much you could have in your parish endowment when you kill off all of your parishioners. When all of your parishioners pass to the life eternal. Okay? So for those of you that are even in small churches, this is a $7.8 million opportunity. And by the way, that's only if they give you that small and that small gift of $78,000, recognizing that some will give you twice that. And for those of you that are in bigger parishes, that's a $31 million endowment. Now I want you to dream for a second what your parish, what your community could do if it had an endowment of $31 million. That's the opportunity that presents itself. Now here's one last thing I want you to think about. It's a little morbid, but it'll get you in the right frame of mind. I told you at the beginning we're all passing to the life eternal. None of us are going to live forever. If any of you are going to live forever, you're the second coming. Would you please come up here and I'll stop talking and you can take it from here. But since the rest of us are not going to live forever, here's the point I want you to think about. How many of your parishioners passed away last year? Multiply that number by $78,630, and that's how much money would have been available to your parish in its planned giving endowment had you had this set up already. So you can start to see the order of magnitude of what we're going to talk about. Now, there are 4 types of generosity, and I want to make sure this is gone, and this is the last thing I'm going to cover before we start to get into the meat of it. Because this is an area that oftentimes gets confused, and what we're going to do is after our conversation and after each of the people come up and talk, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So we want you to be thinking about the questions you want to know, because we're here to answer those questions for you. There are 4 types of generosity that you need to be thinking about in your parish. There's the annual stewardship tithe, and I'm not afraid to use the T word. I'll just tell you that right now. I am not afraid to use the T word. I hope eventually you all won't be either. You may call it your annual stewardship campaign, but I'll call it your annual stewardship tithe. Then there are the periodic capital campaigns where you're actually building a capital asset or improving a capital asset. A wise capital campaign person once told me, a church is either finishing a capital campaign or beginning the next capital campaign. So we seem to have an endless opportunity. So the second thing after our annual giving are capital campaigns. The third thing is emergency philanthropy. By the grace of God, our church is wonderful when it comes to emergency philanthropy. When there's a need, when there's an earthquake, when there's a crisis. If you listen to what Dean said about IOCC, we raised over $3 million to help the folks in Ukraine. We are really good when it comes to that. But it's the 4th thing that we're going to talk about today, planned giving. And what we're going to tell you, and hopefully over the course of the rest of the presentations, you're going to see this is an integrated journey, and they're not a problem. You can go from one to the next without any problem, without any disruption, and they are perfectly integrated together. Now, to get us started on the right thing, since I've inundated you with numbers, we needed a theologian to come speak to us about the theological basis of planned giving, because they certainly don't want any lawyer talking about something like that. So we're blessed to have Father James Corderis, who most of you know is the chairman of the Department of Stewardship, Outreach, Evangelism, and 16 other things that they keep loading up on top of them. You all have known Father Jim in a variety of different capacities, but he has been at the forefront of helping the Archdiocese expand and develop our planned giving campaign. So I wanted to just kind of briefly share, for those of you that don't know Father Jim, prior to his career in a collar, prior to him being a man in black, he actually was a layperson, and he actually was involved in setting up an endowment and a planned giving campaign in his parish that we're going to hear about a little bit later, when he was just a simple parish council president in that regard. But he's, in addition to receiving his Master of Divinity from Holy Cross, he also has an MBA. So he knows a little bit about finance, and he knows a little bit about things that we're going to be talking about today. And he got it from the University of Minnesota, and he also has a BA in psychology. So if he starts to ask you,
Corinthians, what do you have that you did not receive? When we leave a planned gift, we pass on the legacy of our values, of our vision, of our life. We equip those that come after us to continue what we started or what was handed to us to continue from those who came before us, so that it continues after us. In the Old Testament, we see King David. This concept. God denied him the privilege of building the temple with his son, Solomon, after his death. But undeterred by this, David empowered his son to take on that construction. As king, he gathered all the precious materials that were needed to build the temple. He even created the plans for the temple. And he left it all to his son to carry on the mission to build. When almost prepared, King David prayed to God. He said, "But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give this justice as this? Everything comes from you," he said, "and we have given you only what comes from your hand." All of this abundance, he prayed, provide for the church and our ministries for future generations. Some parishes say, "I just want my church to be around to have my funeral." But what we should be saying is, "I want my church to be around for my children's, my grandchildren's grandchildren." We shouldn't be clinging to life, just trying to get to the next step. But we should be looking up to see what ministries we can actually do with the help that we can get from our people. The planned gift is an expression of our faith and our commitment to our church and our ministries. And as parish leaders, all of us as parish leaders, lay leaders and clergy alike, we need to help people understand and expand their thinking of what stewardship is. So many of us just think stewardship is another word for dues. But stewardship is our stewardship of everything in our life. We are stewards of our wealth as well as our income. Think about that. We're stewards of our wealth as well as our income. We talk about percentage giving, tithe giving, as Bill said. But that's about our income. What about our wealth? Are we stewards of our wealth as well? That's what planned giving allows for. We remind ourselves and the people that we lead, because we are all leaders and we lead according to the gifts that we have, but we remind our people that all that we have has been given to us, and it will pass on to others when we are gone. I'm not going to make it as funny as Bill did, but we have to be sure that a portion of what we have goes back to God for His purposes. We've all heard it said, you can't take it with you. You just heard that. And what follows is that our only faithful choice as Orthodox Christians is the careful distribution of our wealth according to our faith, according to what we believe, according to what we value, according to what the church tells us. St. Paul wrote this in 1 Timothy. He said, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, not to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them," he says, "to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age." Paul's telling us that we're to invest in the kingdom yet to come, which is what this life is preparation for in the first place. The parish that nurtures this expanded understanding of stewardship will be blessed, of course, with increased financial strength, which is important to do ministry. But more importantly, the parish becomes a community of faithful people, inspired, filled with the Holy Spirit by their role as faithful stewards. We know from Scripture that with blessings come responsibilities. For everyone to whom much is given, much will be required. We all know that verse. This message of Jesus here in the Gospel of Luke is clear. Our possessions are not only for our own enjoyment, but for the benefit of the people and the world around us. I'm going to conclude with this one thought that I hope you take with you today. Our responsibility to give is just a response, our Orthodox Christian response to God's blessing in our life. Our responsibility to give is simply to respond to God's many blessings in our life. God bless us all.
So we have a great understanding or greater understanding that what we're talking about here is just not some gimmick, it's not just some strategy. There's an underpinning, a theological underpinning to what we're going to do. But what I think is also very helpful for y'all to understand is the commitment that the Archdiocese is now investing and depending and moving forward with respect to this idea of helping all of our parishes establish their planned giving programs and their endowment giving. And so what greater opportunity would we have to do that than to have the woman, superwoman, I not know about Elaine is that she's got her bachelor's degree from the Wharton School of Finance at the University of Pennsylvania, not too shabby. She spent a wonderful career with two great organizations, one of them here in New York, Mitchell & Titus, and another one that you probably heard of, Ernst & Young. And in the course of that incredible career, she's really developed expertise in a whole variety of things, but nonprofit, tax, giving, foundations, endowments, and things of that nature is certainly a part of what she does and what she knows. And in addition to that, she's graciously stepped in and taken over kind of the financial operations from the Archdiocese.
The bad news is I don't speak as quickly as Bill does, but the good news is I only have a few slides. So I won't be up here for too long. Bill asked me to talk to you about endowments. And many times we have parishes that will call the archdiocese, call me, and say, you know, we have a donor, or we as the parish council want to establish an endowment, but we don't quite know how to do that. We don't know what the requirements are from our metropolis or from the archdiocese. We got some questions about how we're able to spend those funds. And in some cases, it comes down also to the donor has some questions about the trust factor. And I see a few people shaking their heads, do they really trust the parish council, which as we know turns over time over time, to be able to administer these endowment gifts? Because the endowment gift, an endowment has a very particular definition within the law, is a gift in perpetuity by a donor, either for a restricted or a non-restricted purpose. So, if you think about that, this gift, and on the slide says it's the gift that keeps giving, but this gift is here for a very long time, intended to be here for perpetuity. Either the original gift that might come from a donor, could be $1 million, could be $100,000, could be Bill's $78,378 number, that goes into a fund, and that is intended to provide investment return. Right now, we have on the slide here safe investments, but we all know, and luckily, the laws that actually govern the utilization and the administration and the fiduciary responsibilities of endowments have really progressed over the years. So that we now have moved to a modern view of how you administer endowments. In that the old notion of you put your money into a safe investment, you put it into bonds, fixed income securities, so that it's going to yield interest and dividends potentially, and that's what you spend? That notion is not, I call it arcane. It's not the way of modern investing, obviously, and it is not the way that endowments need to be administered any longer. So the laws change in each state to allow for endowments to follow a prudent man, or I'd like to say prudent man or woman's rule, over how you invest those assets, with the intent that over the long term, you are prudently investing those assets to meet the intent of the donor. So what does that all mean? That you need to consider risk, you need to consider cash flow in terms of utilization of when those funds are needed, and you need to consider what your own organizational preferences are. Are you conservative investing? Are you willing to take a little more risk? Do you need a growth portfolio? All of those things are considerations, or 8 considerations under the law. The law is called MIFA, Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, and there are 8 considerations that you look at when you decide how to invest those assets. And we'll talk about what the parish needs to do in coming up with that investment policy in a moment. That investment portfolio, that asset allocation between fixed income, equities, alternative investments, liquid cash, whatever it might be, is going to yield, obviously, we put up here interest, but I'd like to use the word investment return. That investment return is therefore available to fund ministry. It can also be available to fund the unrestricted needs, the operating needs of the parish. Again, depending on how the donor sets the gift up. You know, the name of the game always is to have these gifts be as open, as unrestricted as possible. The more restricted the gift, the more limited the ability to utilize those assets, right? So now we have sometimes a conflict between a donor that would like to give it for a very specific purpose. I'd like to buy a piano, right, for the parish, all right? Well, and I'm giving you $5,000, all right? Well, that doesn't necessarily work, and we can talk about gift acceptance policies at another time. But if you are able to solicit gifts that are going to yield returns that can be used for your ministry, this is actually a very favorable way for many donors who want a sustainable, long-term gift. So let's spend, and I'm going to skip this slide, I'm going to go to this slide. Let's spend a few moments talking about how you do this. So the Archdiocese actually does have some guidelines on endowments. And I'm going to take you through the various components of it. First and foremost, if you want to establish an endowment fund, you can do it in a variety of ways. There's no one answer to how endowments are set up. Endowments can be set up within the parish, within the legal entity of the parish, and can be under the auspices of the parish council. They can be set up with a separate endowment fund, a committee, if you will. They can be set up under an investment committee. And those models allow for you to add individuals beyond parish council members that might have expertise in investment management. Or it can be set up as a separate entity, a separate 501c3. The key though, and this is very important, is that if you're going to set it up as a separate entity, that entity must be under the control of the parish council. A majority of the board members of that separate entity must be parish council members. That's how you get to control. And the reason for that is that you don't want those assets being diverted for purposes other than what they were intended for, which is for the benefit of the parish. Right, so you can see you have a lot of flexibility here as to how to do it. Now, why would you set up a separate entity? It goes to the point I made earlier. It's the trust factor. In some cases, a donor may feel that they would prefer if those assets were separated from the parish, if there was the ability to add perhaps a family member or someone that they felt was appropriate to that board of directors or board of trustees. And so there's a variety of reasons as to why you might want to set up a separate entity. Personally, I would say it's not the most efficient way to do it. My experience, and I've handled endowments that have billions of dollars, as well as small family foundations that have a couple of $100,000, is the most efficient way to do this is really under the auspices of the parish council, right? With a separate endowment committee or a separate investment committee, because it doesn't, you don't end up with the potential conflict that happens when you have a separate organization that's making decisions on how to grant funds out. But in some cases, we have entities that actually, and organizations and parishes that actually want to set it up, and it's okay, as long as they are 501c3 and they are controlled by the parish. And that's my point. And of course, the priest. Also, when you are looking at who comes onto these committees, as you can see here on the slide, certainly those individuals need to be appointed by the parish council. So again, what we're looking at is a cascading effect. The parish council up here at the top, you set up an endowment board, you set up an investment committee. Those appointments happen from the parish council down. You have the ability to add people with expertise onto those committees so that you've got the right skill set to be able to administer the fund and you can move forward. The endowment fund is included in the audited financial statements that go forward to the General Assembly every year. Parish Council